Hi, my name is Miguel Iglesias. I am a concept artist and illustrator currently working on this extremely exciting game, Warhammer 40,000 Darktide. In this project, I have mostly been responsible for creating the designs for the characters in the game and generating ideas for the rest of the team. But I was also given the opportunity to create a series of illustrations for the game. Let me share with you some insight into the creative process when creating one of these illustrations. For that purpose, I recorded the process of painting one of these illustrations, depicting this lovely Ogryn. So, to begin with, anytime you are about to start an illustration, before starting sketching anything, it is of vital importance to define the goals of the illustration and its creative and narrative intent. In this case, there were several main goals for all of these series of illustrations. The first of these goals was to create illustrations to inspire the player. To create illustrations that represent and dive into the fantasy offered by the setting of the game. To be an agent of the Inquisition fighting against the forces of chaos in a hive world. Illustrations depicting characters that would condense to its very essence each one of the different roles players could choose to play as. To represent ideal characters, so to speak, that would inspire players into what their own playable character could be and look like. But with the subtle nuance that for these illustrations, we wanted to focus on these so-called ideal characters more from a lore and narrative-oriented point of view rather than a gameplay point of view. This is important. In the case of this specific illustration, I needed to paint an Ogryn gun lugger. Ooh, cool, right? Another main goal for these illustrations was concerning style and art direction. From the very start, we wanted them to follow the classic style of Games Workshop amazing illustrations. To paint them in such a way that they could fit being displayed inside any Warhammer 40k rulebook or codex. And since I have been working myself as an illustrator for Games Workshop, I felt very comfortable with this task. So, alright, for this illustration, I needed to illustrate an Ogryn that loves to make his enemies explode in a spray of fine red mist. The bigger the gun, the better. The more mist, the happier. He specializes in blowing things apart from range, and he likes it a lot. I first started laying a background with brushstrokes to add a painterly texture to it and set the foundation for the piece. Since I already knew I wanted to show the Ogryn firing his gun, I decided to indicate already to a certain level the light setting of the scene by locating a brighter zone in the background, where the muzzle flash of the gun may more or less end up. An important thing to mention at this point is that I decided to start working in grayscale and later on, when adding colors, to ultimately leave the piece to an almost monochromatic level, to underline aesthetically the grim darkness of the 40k setting that is so typical of the book's illustrations from Games Workshop. Once I'm ready with the basic background, as per usual when I can do it, I like to start with the head and face of my character. It helps me out getting into the mindset of the character itself. Like some kind of communion that will help me to understand the character better. To empathize with his motivations, history, life, experiences, etc. etc. First, I need to focus on creating a bulky and strong head. After all, he's an Ogryn, and they have a massive and heavy anatomical construction. I also want to show him as really enjoying shooting his gun, exploding his enemies in a spray of red mist. So I decided to make him green with a cruel and naughty smile combined with a certain savage tone to his stare. In my opinion, Ogryns are very challenging characters to depict under a realistic style because of their construction and exaggerated anatomical features. It is extremely easy to make them look cartoonish, and especially their faces. I also don't want to portray him as dumb, a very common misconception about Ogryns, by the way. But instead, I want to show in his face there is intelligence behind that look. Even if limited, but yes, there is intelligence. Once I have a rough base for the head and face, I start working on the rest of the body and pose for the character. Since from the very beginning I knew I wanted him shooting a very big gun, in my mind the pose was very straightforward from the start and I did not need to struggle to find a proper pose. Now, that being said, what I wanted to achieve with the pose was to show his massive strength and bulkiness by making sure that the gun and the way he's holding it and firing it feels incredibly heavy and powerful. So, to help me out with this, I decided to give him as a weapon, not just a common heavy stabber, no, that's just too little, but a twin-linked heavy stabber instead. That will certainly look massive and heavy, right? Another aspect I wanted to achieve with the pose was to show how massive and bulky Ogryns are. And for that, I thought showing the arms naked with no armor or clothing on them would offer the opportunity to show his huge muscles. I also spent quite some time painting the heavy stabber. Sorry, Holy Throne, forgive me, the twin-linked heavy stabber. And the thing is that weapons in general are also another tricky element when representing their volumes in perspective. So I made sure that the twin-linked heavy stabber, and yes, this time was right, had a solid base before continuing with the rest of the figure. This moment in the process also helped me to establish more accurately the light setting for the piece, having its muzzle flash as the main light source for the whole scene. Once I had most of the pose established in a rough stage, it was the time to start adding a little bit more complexity to the character, by defining some of its elements and adding more details to them as well. First, I thought it was a good idea to give him some armor, to add a stronger visual sense of power to the character, but also to add context since it would make sense that he could be wearing some armor. It should not be anything elaborate in this case though, but quite simple and efficient. I also thought adding a huge shoulder pad to his left arm, the one that he's exposed when firing, would be a nice addition, adding an extra layer of context to the character by showing in this way that this is the part he wants to protect the most since it would be the most vulnerable. After that, I started adding some details here and there, like some scars, the Imperial Eagle on his forehead, and started laying the cast shadows created by the light source of the muzzle flash. This gave me the opportunity to start with a new stage of the process, to start painting an environment for the character to be in. Since the main focus for these character illustrations is the characters, the environments play a secondary role, and I will be using them just as support elements for the characters. With this in mind, I did not want to put too much work on it by defining everything to a high degree and adding plenty of details. That would take away the attention of the public from the character, so I will keep it rough and simple. At this point, I realized that I needed to resize the character a little bit to create a more balanced composition overall for the illustration. Since part of the game will be taking place in the Underhive, I thought it would be a good idea for this piece to create some confined space for the background, to recreate the idea of fighting in tight industrial looking areas and corridors. To add a little bit more of that feeling, I thought it would be a good idea to put his back against a wall, like there is no place to escape from here. Alright, now I have all the different elements needed in the piece on a rough level. So from this point forward, I started defining every one of these elements and adding a series of small details that will help making the character and the scene more interesting and compelling. During this stage of the process, sadly, I had some issues with the recording and I lost part of it. That is why you will notice a jump. But basically, I was adding and defining the different gear elements on the character, like the ammo belt, the grenades, or adding the cascade of used cartridges of the fired rounds flying in the air and piling up on the ground. And adding the skulls on the ground as well, or defining a little bit more some elements of the environment like the hanging chains or how the light was affecting the environment, and etc, etc. I also needed to increase a sense of space and depth to the whole scene. So I started by adding some smoke from the firing gun and playing around by placing some few elements in the foreground and behind his figure. This way the whole piece will feel less flat. Once I have finished with this, it's time to start with the final stage of the whole process, adding colors and some extra texture to the image. As I mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to keep this illustration quite muted in colors, almost monochromatic, to underline the grim dark tone of the 40K setting. Choosing to start with grayscales first and adding a series of diluted layers of colors later was a very deliberate choice on my part to accomplish that. Now it is just about finding a general color palette that fits the scene. And since the main source of light is going to come from the light of the muzzle flash, it made sense to go for a warm set of colors with a dominating yellow hue. Once I established the color overall for the whole image, I spent the time fine-tuning here and there until I felt happy with the results. And it is done, resulting in this very happy Ogryn. Just look at him, how much fun he's having while killing heretics with his massive twin-link heavy stabber. So, I hope you enjoyed this time-lapse video and the explanation on the creative process that went into creating and painting one among the series of illustrations that you will be able to find and enjoy in the game. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video to help me grow the channel so I can spend more time delivering more quality content and tutorials for you. If you did enjoy it, give it a like, share the video and subscribe for more and to help me grow the channel. If you like my work, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can spend more time creating quality content for this channel here on YouTube, and to support the creation of my own awesome grim dark sci-fi project about space pirates called The Brothering of the Clouds, that you will have the opportunity to be part of by becoming a patron on top of all the extra goodies of each tier. You will find a direct link to my Patreon down below on the description section. And of course, huge shout out to my patrons. Thanks to your support and becoming part of the crew, you are making this possible. Have a good one, and until next time, bye bye, and may the Emperor protect you.